Good evening. Welcome to Reflections on East Granby. This is the October 17th, 2009 edition. My name is Mike Malloy and I'll be your host this evening. Our guest for tonight is Charles F. Hunderlach of 14 Mount Vernon Drive in East Granby, longtime resident of East Granby, and it's a pleasure to have you here tonight, Charles. Charlie.
Thank you, Mike.
There we go. Now we'll start calling you Charlie, okay?
Okay,
all right.
Very good.
Okay, Charlie, why don't we usually start by just taking you back to where you're from, a little bit about your childhood. You were born on December 2nd, 1922.
Correct.
Which makes you 87 years old.
As of
86 years old.
87 on December 2nd of this year.
We're coming up on your 87th birthday in December. And why don't you tell us a little bit about where you're from and your memories from your early years as a child?
Well, I was born in Middletown.
Okay.
I was born in a church on Main Street, on Church Street, and which no longer is a hospital. And my father worked at W.S. Reynolds' garage, which is just down the way a little bit. I stayed in Middletown in the proper, living on Loveland Street, and then we moved out to outskirts of town to help our grandmother. It was still in Middletown. So I went to Woodrow Wilson School, graduating in 1941, and I graduated on a Thursday night. A group of us went up to Howard Johnson's on Silestine Highway in Rocky Hill, and a very uneventful event compared to what they do today.
That's where they held the ceremony?
That was after the ceremony.
Oh, I see, like the reception.
And the next morning, I took off for Pratt Whitney, applied for a job, and Monday morning I was working in Pratt Whitney in the Billings and Spencer foundry on Park Street, learning how to read blueprints and operate a milling machine.
So it was Pratt Whitney?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, this was a Pratt Whitney sponsored course.
Okay.
And then I went to work in Department 210, running a milling machine, putting out parts. And I was very impressed with my first paycheck, which was, I think, $24.75.
Wow.
Big deal.
Big deal, right? Now, the day it was quite a bit of money.
What helped a great deal was, as we progressed in making parts over a certain number, we'd get a bonus. And every month I would get a bonus of about $200.
That's substantial.
It was pretty substantial, making up for the shortfall. And within a short time, I asked my father about buying a new car, and this was on the 2nd of December of '41, and he indicated that I was not ready for it yet. However, on December 31st, he said, "I think it's time for us to go looking at a new car for you." Went down to his garage, and there was a nice Airflow Chrysler there. And I said, "Well, how about that?" "Oh, no, that's too much power for you." So we went over to Portland, Jackson Brothers, Plymouth and DeSoto facility, and there was one 1942 Plymouth in the showroom. And that was it. So I liked it, and we bought it.
Brand new car.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
And then the next morning, we heard that all production of cars had been stopped.
Oh.
So that if I didn't buy it on that day, I would not have had a new car.
Probably doubled in value overnight.
for a year or so.
Yeah.
And so I was very pleased about that. And let's see, following that, I went to...
Let's just stop for 1 second.
Yeah.
What do you remember about Middletown when you were growing up? What are your memories? What are your earliest memories from Middletown?
Well, one thing I remember, which I think is kind of important today, is that I had to walk to school, probably a mile and a half.
Okay.
And went to Long Hill School before I went to Woodrow Wilson. And from what I've been hearing from various doctors, they say that the individuals who walked to school have a longer life.
Interesting.
And I was very pleased to hear that. I'd even walk from like Long Lane Farm, which was nearest, to Middletown without giving it a thought.
Right.
A couple of miles. And then, of course, I got a bicycle later and I used that. But I can't say as I can give you any more information about Middletown than that, except that this tie I'm wearing is something I bought in R.W. Camp's clothing store in Middletown.
Really?
Yeah, back in probably 1950.
Wow. Looks
And
pretty good.
I treasure it for this time of the year
Absolutely.
because of its the fall foliage here.
Okay.
I met Amy. She was rooming at
So
my,
let's just say, introduce you. Your wife's name is Amy.
Yeah.
And what was her maiden name?
Amy McGann.
Okay.
She lived in Hamden, and during the week she was teaching at Middletown High School, so she was rooming with my aunt Anna and Uncle Earl. And I finally got to meet her one day. I was working the second shift at Pratt Whitney, and then one night I had an eye examination, so I was able to drop down in to see her. And as soon as she came down the stairs from her room, I said, "That's the girl for me."
You
Just
didn't
like
need
that.
your eyes checked after that, right?
Without even any conversation, I said, "Boy,
bet.
that's the girl for me."
Yeah.
So we got married after 3 years of our engagement in New Haven,
Right.
and went on honeymoon to Nassau, Bahamas, and returned. And what was interesting about my return was at the time I returned, I had a letter saying report for active duty,
Okay.
and I went to Fort Dix to register for active duty.
How old were you at the time?
I was about 26, 27,
Okay.
something like that.
Yep.
And when I got my orders there, they were going to send me down to Birmingham, Alabama, and doing a particular task I don't remember, but I didn't want any part of that. So I spoke to this major who was coordinating this activity and suggested a change. So he sent me to Shreveport, Louisiana. I'm very glad that that happened that way. So I went through a personnel interview. What was kind of interesting was for 1 month they didn't issue uniforms.
Huh.
I had just my civilian clothes, had to launder them, and
Was that until they saw what you were going to do, or was that just
well, it
because
was
they were
just
short?
the way things were so messed up with this sudden influx of
Okay, they just didn't have them.
inactive reserve service and so forth. So I went through the personal interviews, and I had a problem with my hands, whereby oil caused them to break out and become very raw. So I said, I don't want a job doing any mechanical work anymore on engines. So the personnel interviewing officer says to me, well, if you've got to pursue this yourself, I can't advise anyone about this, so you'll have to just pursue a job that's suitable for you. So I got to the hangar, and I met with the captain and the master sergeant in charge of maintenance personnel, and I told him my story, and he said, well, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll let you be the engine inspector, and we'll also take charge of this take order compliance room and file the revisions and answer any questions concerning this, which relates to the engines and aircraft as well. Well, I just did that for 1 day, and I decided I was going to take off and went down to the maintenance, to the tech order compliance group on base, spoke to a major there, Major Yost, and I said, I'd like to consider working with you people here just for 1 year. He said, well, I haven't got any openings to accommodate you, but I had a letter with me from the personnel manager of Pratt Whitney, and I showed it to him. It just listed all the things I had done at Pratt Whitney up to that point, 41 to 50, and he says, well, let me take this up with the wing commander, and we'll see what we can do. Next morning, I fell in for roll call, and when the master sergeant says, Hunderlach, he says, report to maintenance control. So I took off and had myself a job.
So you were carrying your resume around with you. That was pretty
yeah.
smart.
And I wound up assisting a master sergeant
Okay.
for the 91st Strat Recon Wing, and there was a 301st Bomb Wing there too. And there was, at one time, this Barksdale Army Air Force was the largest air base in the States. And so this master sergeant instructed me about making out the forms and following up on things and maintaining a logbook and so forth. And then after three months, he got recalled to active duty as a first lieutenant helicopter pilot. and was shipped out to Puerto Rico.
Okay.
So this left me in charge
Wow.
of the wing.
Things moved quick back then.
Oh yeah. I was only a corporal at the time, but I made buck sergeant just about that time. And before I got out, I made staff sergeant. But as things progressed, I had in maintenance control, I had 2 field phones, a base phone, and a radio communications to operate, to follow up on these orders. And it was very nice in the maintenance control building because I was right on the line, could watch aircraft coming and going. But then after a period of time, they moved us to a hangar down the line, and some other inactive reservists came in. So I had a tech sergeant and a buck sergeant from Alabama working with me on this job,
Right.
which helped somewhat. And of course, then I was discharged. So got back to Pratt Whitney, and I got back, and I didn't go back to the same job I had before. I went to a job on the suggestion committee.
They actually had a job on a full-time job for the suggestion.
Yeah.
Okay.
But maybe before I go into that, I ought to mention the fact that when I started in Pratt Whitney, after serving a short time in this manufacturing department and the milling machine, I was transferred down to the assembly department, and I spent a little time on the final build line of some engines. But then I found out that it was a challenge for me to do some of the wiring. It takes quite a bit of experience to learn to properly wire certain things within the engine so that the nuts don't come off and so forth.
Got to get that right.
So I went to tear down, and I was tear down in these major engines, and I liked that okay. But then the next thing, they put me on the green line, and I was assembling these major engines. And what was interesting is I was challenged on the valve timing. There are 24 cylinders on these 4360 major engines, and I had to time the valves on those 28 cylinders. And then also I put 7 magnetos on and timed them.
Wow.
And I prided myself by doing the valve timing fastest of anybody in the group at that time. But I couldn't beat this older man who did the magnetos. Always came up short on the same time he had.
Couldn't take out the old magneto ace, huh?
No. But then I went from learning, they put me over to building a power. A power section is the crankcase, building that up, and I spent some time doing that on my own, and then they brought me over and made me a group leader on the final power build. Then after that I went into the assembly office, and it was from the assembly office where I worked as an engineering change expediter, recording the incorporation of new engineering changes on engines and documenting all that information.
So in that day, though, Pratt & Whitney was a massive operation. It was like a city within itself, was it?
Huge, yeah.
Was it 30,000 employees or something in that?
And I used to be a runner to bring things up to the factory manager from my superintendent and Bill Cross, and I invited him and others in the office there to my wedding. So when I got back from the Air Force, then they put me into the suggestion committee as an investigator.
Right.
I spent 2.5 years there. Found it to be interesting and somewhat challenging.
So you would take the suggestions and go out and verify their application or whether or not they were
and then
valid?
determine whether or not it was feasible
Excellent.
for them to be incorporated.
Right.
And contacting engineering personnel, maintenance personnel, whoever what might be apply. And I covered the whole plant that way. Well, then I again transferred to the Service Records Department in Hartford. As a matter of fact, we worked in this building on the corner of State Street, right by the old State House there, and it was, let's see, what was it called? Well, anyway, it's not there anymore. But anyway, that was kind of appropriate, since I lived in East Granby. Then we moved up to Podunk, which was in South Windsor, and from there we moved to Middletown.
Okay, so you're married to Amy, you're working, you're back from the service, you're You're gainfully employed again at Pratt & Whitney. And where are you living initially when you first come back from the military?
Well, I guess I might say that when we first got married, we moved to Haddam.
Okay.
And we lived in a rental there in the colonial home, and we stayed there just 2.5 years.
And prior to being
in that time period, Amy and I took the Dale Carnegie leadership course.
Okay.
And as a result of that experience, I got over some of my shyness, and I was approached by an individual neighbor. He said, "We're trying to organize a Boy Scout troop here. Would you want to help?" I said, "Sure." So I went around interviewing people for committee positions, assistant scoutmasters, etc.
Wow.
And then I became a secretary for the troop, and I actually assistant leader for some period of time. Well, within a year, we decided to buy a home in Windsor, and so we moved to Windsor. And then I became active up there in the Troop 26 as assistant scoutmaster. Then I started getting into commissioner work on the district level. I became a leadership training chairman of leaders for both Boy Scouting and Cub Scouting. And I had a fine group of 5 men working with me, all college graduates, on the Boy Scout course. And I had another team of people working on the Cub Leader course. Well, I was vice chairman of the district for a time, and after 10 years of leadership training at the district level, I moved into the council as a board member for the council training chairman on Charter Oak Council. And I served there for 6 years, and then the council merged with other areas of our state and became the Long Rivers Council.
Okay.
After a time, I became the advancement chairman of that council for 7 years, and then it became the Connecticut Rivers Council, and I served on the finance committee.
So you've been involved for the Boy Scouts through quite an evolution of their time.
And I've run Cub powwows, which is probably we have a staff of about 35 people for Cub leader training. And also I run show and do's for Boy Scout leaders, having a similar size staff over the years. And I was very lucky. Things always worked out quite well for me.
Well, it sounds like you're a pretty committed and organized individual. If you approach most things like that, you're going to find some success, you would think. But it sounds like your skills met their match there.
Let's see now. I joined the Knights of Columbus, Council 3181 in Windsor in 1968. I went through my 4 degrees, and then we moved to East Granby, 1969.
Okay.
And I waited a period of time before I became active with the Simsbury Council, probably 1974. And what was kind of interesting about that experience was they were meeting in a carriage house which was near right opposite the mobile gas station.
On Hot Meadow?
On Hot Meadow, near the church. And they had been living in this carriage house, had a room set up for them and so forth. And I was kind of impressed with the facilities. And then the next morning, I read in the paper the building burned down overnight.
Oh, no.
So then we had to search for a new facility, and Bill Hayes of Simsbury was very active in that committee, and I was the secretary for the Knights of Columbus at that time, and we pursued different thoughts and finally decided to lease a facility next to Roland's Barber Shop in Terriffill.
Okay.
Which is going to be up as of January of this year.
It's still there, yeah. It's a nice little spot.
It's a little bit small.
Yeah.
So we're going to Father Flower has agreed to let us meet in the parish hall, which is below the church, very nice facility, at a minimum charge. We're paying quite a bit to Roland, but so this is a change.
So that was quite a long lease. I mean, this is going back to
that was 84. The lease was from 84 to just 84.
Okay, so we jumped ahead about 15 years.
Yeah. And
Okay, so let's just talk for a moment about, it sounds like you're a very involved individual, to say the least. When you first drove into, or first came to visit East Granby, what were the circumstances there, and how did you end up, well, let's start with, what was your first impression of the town?
well, it's a country town, and I appreciated that fact, and seeing cows around and so forth. And most of the time I entered the East Granby by virtue of 189,
Okay.
coming up from Bloomfield, that is from Windsor.
Right.
And the reason for that is because my in-laws my in-laws built the first cottage in Granbrook Park. So in the summertime, we always were up at the park weekends.
But you know what? Let me ask you a quick question about Granbrook Park back then. It was that was before the dam broke. There was a dam that actually was there actually like a small lake or a small?
Well, the Salmon River.
The Salmon River, but that had been dammed.
It's
correct?
wide, not necessarily. I don't believe so.
No.
No, there was a big wide area for swimming there, in the sandy beach and so forth.
So they put cottages around it.
Oh yeah.
Interesting.
And like my father-in-law, John McGann, he helped his brother build the second cottage.
Okay.
And of course, when this big flood came in '55, the water came right up to the ceiling of my father-in-law's cottage, and everything was condemned in that park because of that.
Now, approximately how many cottages were there down there?
I haven't any idea.
You don't remember? Yeah?
No.
Was it?
Didn't take count of that, but quite a few.
Quite a few.
Some of these were permanent homes for some people. And as a result of that, when they tried the state helped them out by providing money for them to buy other homes.
The people that were actually residents there.
Yeah. My father-in-law decided that he was going to tear down the cottage. He didn't want it burned down, so he and my wife and brother-in-law and sister-in-law tore down the cottage and loaded it up in his truck and took it up to Granby, where they built a house and bought a house on Walker Drive. And with the lumber they had, they put an addition onto the two-car garage that they had moved from Granbrook Park to Granby.
So that wood in that house has seen quite a history.
Oh, I'm telling you.
Been flooded at one point. Yeah, in that flood, a few people passed away. There were some fatalities.
Yeah, matter of fact, the neighbor of one of my father-in-laws had a young girl, and her father refused to leave.
Right.
They had a very small cottage, and apparently when she was loaded into a boat by the firemen and were rescuing people there, she fell into the water, and the water was so swift it took her right away, and that's how she passed away.
Okay.
If she had been taken out of there earlier, this would never have happened.
Yeah, it's
unfortunate.
Tough story. Yeah.
So let's see. Where
So you're in. So that was just. Your first impressions were of that area because you were coming up there to stay at the cottage.
And we wanted a property with a view. And we had Norm Baker, was a real estate man from Bloomfield. He showed us around a number of places, and we finally settled on this place on Mount Vernon Drive. And we were the second house that was built on that. We bought the property from Ray Run Carey, and we had a builder, Claude Pierce, who moved out of town afterwards. We have a 10-room house, and we have a basement that's finished, and we've had parties there. The first party we had was for Min D'Addario, who was a mayor of Middletown running for governor against Tom Meskel.
Yep.
And we invited most of the Democratic leadership in various communities around.
Right.
And we had 120 people come.
Wow.
And we had Monsignor Daly from St. Gabriel's Church come up, and we got an organ donated by an outfit in Avon in our living room, and he brought his lead singer along and played and sang. We had champagne and a fountain in the keeping room and so forth.
Quite a party, huh?
We got a big picture of that group, and it was kind of an impressive event.
Yeah.
So
you've moved into East Granby. You got involved pretty quickly in the society here. That was kind of a extension, but you moved into Mount Vernon Drive, and both you and your wife got involved locally with some of the civic groups in town, correct?
Actually, things didn't begin to happen, I don't think, until I became a Lion member in '74. One of my neighbors, George Lamasser, invited me to a meeting, and I was very much impressed with the program of Lions International and Lions locally. So I joined, and I found that was the most important decision I ever made.
Really?
Of all the other roles I've had, I was the president of Meriden Dale Carnegie alumni for about 10 years. But just getting involved with another group, it was a good group. And we're still active. I've got 35 years of perfect attendance as of this month.
Wow.
And then the bicentennial came along. And my wife was an officer, I think a vice president. Dick Rumeyer was the president, and I was the secretary.
For the bicentennial committee.
Right.
Right.
And then, with that in mind, Amy says, we need a historical society in town. So she worked with Ethel Wilton on Holcomb Street, longtime resident, to organize the event at her house. And she signed up 75 people that first day.
Wow.
And that was the beginning of the East Granby Historical Society.
And they're going strong, too.
Yeah, they're still maintaining pretty good membership. From there, I guess I got wind of the fact that the Friend to Friend organization was interested in having someone work with them, and they had a food pantry they were establishing, and also a thrift shop. So I joined that group, and I was active with them for 12 years. I was a vice president, board of director member, worked in all their activities. And
now the thrift shop, is that the one that's over, do they still have their thrift shop?
it's on Spoonville Road.
Yeah, that's I wasn't sure what the
People donate
association.
clothing
Yep.
to this, and then they sell it at a reduced cost and help many families that way. People donate food to the food pantry, which is located in the Congregational Church in East Granby, and they've been very accommodating on that. The Boy Scouts collect the food first weekend in November usually, and sort it out and count it and so forth, and all that's reported to the Boy Scouts for the service work that they're doing. Now let's see, where are we?
So you have a big party up on the hill. No, that was, but you'd moved into town and you were getting involved in the different institutions or civic groups. In 1976, that was the bicentennial. You moved. Your wife became involved with was one of the founding members of the Historical Society.
Oh, yeah.
If you're going forward from there. Why don't we stop there for a moment? What in that you've been in town now for 7 or 8 years? Had you seen any changes in town at that point, or was it just the kind of a continuation?
Well, I'm not too sure when this happened, but they rebuilt the highway, Route 20.
Okay.
I think we had to come in through School Street.
Right.
Initially.
Yeah.
And I don't remember when that change took place.
It was in that era at some point. I don't have an exact date, but many of the people in your generation speak about it and talk about the different changes that brought to the town, because it created in some ways a division right through the center of town.
Yeah.
But it changed the downtown dramatically.
Well, close to that date, 1977, Bob Connors, who was the chairman of the Democratic Town Committee, appointed me to the Noise Abatement Policy Committee at Bradley Field.
Okay.
And I got a letter from Governor Al Grasso to confirm that. And since I had some background with aviation, they thought that might be appropriate. So I worked at that for about 3 years.
Okay.
And of course, many East Granby residents in the south end of town were concerned about the noise, and there were some so-called hush kits who were available to modify some of these engines, and that was done, but that was not enough. I think they had to change the angle of takeoff to a more steep angle. It would help to reduce the noise too.
Right.
And then I think after that they determined that they would pay for installing additional insulation in these homes in south end of town to help the residents in that regard.
Now, it seems like, correct me if I'm wrong, but the advances in aviation have reduced the noise from airplane engines over time, because you hear some of the older engines and they're quite a bit louder.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there were changes made to do that.
Yeah.
But that was a costly thing, and so sometimes the airline stalled on that proposal.
It costs money.
At that same time, in 1977, Bob appointed me as an alternate to the Board of Finance.
Okay.
And for 22 years, I attended meetings.
Did you ever run to be a full member, or you just stayed on?
No, I was content just to be an alternate member, and I don't think I ever did run for the position.
It was a very Republican town in that day.
Oh, yeah. But I was able to, serve well, and I was an alternate for Don Holtman, who was the present attorney for the town of Granby.
Right.
So, let's see.
So what were the challenges on the Board of Finance back in those days? The same as today?
Well, like Frank Rothamer, first selectman, of course, he was, when they put in sewer lines on this new highway I spoke about, they could have put in a 6-inch sewer line or a 8-inch sewer line. Of course, there was a sizable difference in cost for that. But I thought that it was important that we go for the extra cost of 8 inches to accommodate new businesses in town. So I got the Board of Finance to agree to do that.
Good.
And that was helpful to him, at least.
Yeah.
So I got along with the Republican candidates as well as the...
I think in local issues you'll find that outside the election season there's pretty good collegiality amongst interests. They work together. And hey, look, it's a small town. There's not much difference between what you want or what your neighbor wants, usually. It can get a little divisive on specific issues, especially when they affect neighborhoods or specific areas of town. But I think in the whole, most of the people are in agreement on most things.
Yeah.
So it's just a matter of how you get there.
Well, I might mention the fact that my Knights of Columbus experience, after serving about 14 years as a secretary, I was elevated to the position of Grand Knight, and I served that position just 1 year, but then I became a treasurer for them and served 12 years at that.
Right.
And then, let's see, next thing I got involved with was the AARP Farm and Valley 790 organization. And when I joined that group, my registration form says, would you consider being an officer?
Okay.
I said, sure. I would, yes. Next thing I knew, I was an assistant secretary. Secretary moved to Florida, and I became secretary.
It's like a theme in your life. You're an underling, and the people take off and put you in charge.
Then the next thing was assistant treasurer. Well, this one woman from Bloomfield, she came to one of our banquets in June. She looked absolutely beautiful, and within a couple of days she passed away.
Huh.
So I became treasurer. And from that point, it was second vice president, first vice president,
right,
and then president. I served for president for 3 years.
And what area does that cover?
This would cover. As a matter of fact, I might mention the fact that the number of members in the AARP chapter, 790, was about 325 when I joined. We'd probably have over 100 people meet at Eno Hall for our meetings once a month, and we had a board meeting, of course, another meeting night. And let's see, what was I going to say now?
So you're just running through your posts that you...
I also served as a past president on the board for just 2 years.
Okay.
After that, so then I got involved in the Grange. My wife was a member of the Grange from the late 50s on up to Windsor
Grange. Okay.
Windsor Grange, and then Windsor Grange folded, and so they got Amy to join the Granby Grange.
Okay.
Well, I found out the Granby Grange meeting night was the first and third Thursday of the month, as opposed to this second Thursday that the Windsor Grange had, so I could join the Grange. So I joined in 2002, and in 2003 they made me master. Now I've been a master of the Granby Greens since this fall of 2003.
Okay.
I've served, I went through all my 7 degrees. In the 7th degree, I drove up to Burlington, Vermont, where the national organization had a meeting, and took my 7th degree there.
Wow.
So I wanted to make sure I was well qualified to do the
So
job.
I'm starting to understand all the buttons that you have on your shirt. Are those specific to any group? Or are they?
Well, I got a pin here for 50 years in Boy Scouting.
Okay.
I've got a Silver Beaver Award I received from the Council in 1972.
Okay.
I have a Melvin Jones Fellow from the East Granby Lions Club,
Okay.
and I have another one after that. So, 7th degree pin. What's kind of strange is the Grange doesn't provide a pin for the master to wear.
Okay.
Only after he's served whatever time they
Right.
give him a pin. And I've
Got to
spoken.
make sure he sticks around for a few.
I've spoken to 2 national presidents at our state convention about this issue, showing them the Lions President's plug, for President's
Right.
pin, and the Knights of Columbus Grand Knights pin,
Right.
and try to convince them to make one for the Grange.
Right.
It hasn't happened.
Huh.
So,
Well, it sounds like, you know, that once again, I've interviewed several seniors at this point, and I've found that there is a pattern of involvement that gets you to your age and it's maintaining the capacity you have. I mean, you've stayed very busy over the last 50 to 70 years of your civic involvement in different groups that you've gotten involved in.
I might also comment about my term in 40 years with Pratt & Whitney.
Oh, you know, I was going to get back to that. Were you working at Pratt through this whole period?
Yeah, oh
Your
yeah.
paying job, that
Right.
is. Right.
So anyway, I served for 40 years, and I took the early retirement at 58.
Okay.
I applied for a job at Gas Turbine,
Right.
and I was employed there for just 13 months in the finance department. And what was interesting about that is they overhauled these gas turbine engines that were used to generate electricity, run a dynamo,
Ground generation.
ground generation. And, you know, it's amazing the cost of refurbishing these engines would run well over $300,000 just to
Wow.
repair them.
Yeah.
Well, I stuck that out until things got slow, and then I was laid off. And I give it a few months, I got a phone call from a consulting firm, wanted to know if I'd like to come back to Pratt & Whitney. And
Okay.
they gave me a salary figure, which I found hard to believe. So I said, well, let me think it over. I thought it was just a joke or something.
Right.
Well, I looked them up and looked up their name in the phone book,
You thought it was a lark. Yeah.
and found out that it was a legitimate company. So I called them on Monday and says, okay, I'll consider it. Well, they said, we'll probably keep you here just for about 4 months. And since you have experience in the records department, running the computer to do the update of engineering change incorporation data
Right.
in what is known as an engine parts list, we'd like to have you work with these men in this engineering change group
Mm-hmm.
to instruct them and help them to bring everything up to date. We'll probably keep you about 4 months, they said.
Right.
And I said, okay. So I started working with them, and I had to learn new computer programs. I had about 7 or 8 years, I guess, with computer. And I was also, for a time, involved with a whole library for all the product support departments and coordinated their input. So anyway, as it developed, I worked 5 days a week and sometimes 6 days a week and Saturdays.
Now, how old were you at this point?
I was probably in my 61, 62, somewhere.
Okay.
Well, now I was older than that because I worked through my 65th birthday. 5 years with them.
Part of this short-term contract.
And what was kind of interesting is I worked in this engineering design department,
Right.
and the manager of that design department oftentimes would stay late and come walking through the department. I'd be working at the computer, because with flex time, you could come in at a time, say, I was scheduled to come in at 9 o'clock,
Right.
and I'd work till 5 or whatever. So he would just chat with me briefly, you know. And I like that flex time idea because I never like to get up too early in the morning.
Oh, no kidding. That's interesting.
And that's true today, too.
Okay. So that rounded out your career. So you ended up back at Pratt where you started, basically.
The one big thing I did in service engineering records, it was also called engine operations data,
Right.
was to do conversions for customers, update their models from one model to another. And there's whereby we had this engine parts list to review, and engineering told us what engineering changes we were to select to do this. And we'd have to describe the rework of parts, replacement of parts, listing all these facts. And I've done conversions for any number of airlines all over the world.
Right. Wow. So you're basically, your job was to update the part numbers and the stock.
Yeah, to show what, for example, going from a JT D1 to a D, or going from a JT9 D3 to a D7, so forth.
Yep.
And
so that they could correlate the proper parts
Yeah.
and stuff. So okay, so you're that's still over 20 years ago. So you've had quite a robust retirement, haven't you? That's a testament to your involvement. So if you were to look back in the years that you've been East Granby, jumping forward a bit here to today, what's the biggest change that you've noticed?
well, the widening of Route 20
And
at Holcomb Street, did a beautiful job with that.
Okay.
And I think that was a very significant change in East Granby.
The recent one.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah. They did a good job.
Yeah.
Yeah. At first, it was a little rough looking when they were just carving the rock out, but it came together nicely. I think it's a nice looking addition. So, if you were looking back, I mean, you were fairly involved in the town through the Board of Finance. Is there anything? This is a question I ask everyone. Is there anything you think could have been done differently? Acknowledging that hindsight's 20/20. I mean, looking back, is there anything you wish had been done differently?
Can't think of anything.
Okay. I always say that because there's the only reason I ask that question is I think sometimes there's benefit from looking back, you know, and reflecting.
Always.
But you're comfortable with the way things happened.
Something else I got involved with long in the mid-'70s was being a friendly visitor. And a friendly visitor is an individual who visits with some senior citizen
Okay.
who doesn't have much contact with the outside. And I visited a person up on Route 20 once a week, spent about an hour with him, and he was getting into his 90s. Matter of fact, he passed away at about 94.
Right.
And I would sometimes mow his lawn, I'd trim shrubbery around his place and so forth. And one time he was looking for a cap, so I took him up to, let's see, not the Eastfield Mall, but what's the other big mall up in Massachusetts? Is above
Holyoke Mall, Ingleside?
Where?
Ingleside, that's the Holyoke Mall.
Right. I took him up there to pick out a cap for him and so forth. You know?
A hat?
Just a cap. You know?
Okay.
But so I did that for a while. And
What was his name?
I can't think of his name at the moment, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But he turns out to be the father of the person in East Granby, not East Granby, in Granby, who was a member of our Grange, Vivian
okay.
Shaw.
Okay.
It was her father. And when I joined the Grange, it was to help Vivian Shaw and Lyle Shaw, longtime members, to make a success of it. I've been able to recruit younger people more recently, and I've also suggested we change the meeting night to a Friday,
Okay.
because sometimes the meetings got long, and we had a couple of long-winded members that liked to converse. So I got a vote to change it to Friday, and I recruited these people from Burlington, actually, who had formerly lived in Granby, Janet Ennis, and her husband Ron, and also her sister Carol from East Windsor. And they worked with me on a blood drive yesterday
Oh, wow.
in Granby. And so now I've got them trained to handle registration for the blood drive. And Granby Grange is the first group in town to have done a blood drive. And there's a sign inside the foyer of our building that's about that wide, sand about that high, wood about that thick for the flood right, and none of us can move it.
Yeah. Well, you're a real organizing dynamo, aren't you? You get in there and you kind of make things happen.
Well, I just, I like to do things like that.
Yeah.
And the people usually feel good about it after they've participated.
I agree. Once people get involved in some sort of group or civic group or just any volunteer organization, they tend to, it's so rewarding, they tend to keep doing it in other ways.
I've been involved with St. Bernard's Church for a number of years, but going back to 1984. Mm-hmm. I was on the renovation, vice chairman of the renovation committee.
It's beautiful
for the rectory.
You did a good job.
And I also coordinated the installation of a concrete patio around our church with bricks in it.
Okay.
And put in a new parking lot that has repaved it. And I was 12 years as a building and grounds chairman. And also I served Father in regard to putting advertisements on the back of our church bulletin in 1993 when he came.
As a way to pay for the publication.
Yeah, and that would bring in almost $10,000.
Oh, good for them. Man.
So that was a big help to him, and he did that for 13 years.
Now, when you thinking back to those days when you were in East Granby, is there any? This is another question I ask because I find it interesting. There's always some character that stands out, somebody that you interacted with that people remember maybe more sharply than others, or is there anybody that you remember you'd like to tell us about that back from your days and involvement in the town government, the town civic groups? Anybody that you find yourself reminiscing about? It's probably a lot of them, but
no, not really. I just I guess I've spread myself out so thin in different areas. I mean, people in Boy Scouting. Yeah. At the church or in Granby.
Right.
And of course I'm a member of both the East Granby seniors and also the Granby seniors and Simsbury seniors.
Right.
So.
Well, that's why we just gave Charlie a lifetime achievement, his wife a lifetime achievement award for the Democratic Town Committee, from the Democratic Town Committee, and his wife a lifetime achievement award. And a distinguished Democrat for us is somebody like yourself, who's a super citizen, where you got involved in so many different organizations and groups and gave back far more than many of us find the time to do, and that's a testament to your character. If you were to think, if you were to give advice to a young person today, just based on your extensive experience in civic groups and watching people grow up and with the Boy Scouts, what if there was one piece of advice that you would give to a young person today, what would that be?
Well, if it was a young person in their, say, 8, 9, or 10, I'd say, consider joining the Cub Scouts.
Okay.
And then go on to Boy Scouting.
Okay.
Now, the East Granby Lions Club has sponsored the troop in town, Troop 70, since 1960.
Wow.
And I arranged to have a plaque made, the Lions Club paid for it, on the community center of all the Eagle Scouts. And we have, I think, 55 Eagle Scouts listed on that board. I think that's very unusual for this community.
The size of the town?
Because normally you think of an Eagle Scout being attainable, maybe 1% of young people get to that point. Really? And the Scoutmasters we've had in town, Brian Spears and currently Peter, I think it was Bradley, have done so well. And one individual who was the advancement chairman is Keith Antioch, and I knew him as a Boy Scout.
Wow. And
he hung in there as a Boy Scout, made Eagle, and then came back to the troop after he had a young family to serve as an advancement chairman.
So we've produced quite a number of impressive Eagle Scouts.
Another thing I've done too is I've made a plaque up for all the past presidents. No one had thought about doing this.
Okay.
Now we have all the past presidents of the Lions Club just inside the door on the left-hand side. And Don Cedar, of course, was our most recent president, and he served for 3 years, which is very unusual.
Right.
But he's an outstanding individual, I think.
I've met him a few times. Great guy. Yeah.
And I saw him at a Historical Society meeting The meeting was, we had refreshments, then we returned to have the meeting, community center, and he headed for the kitchen and started washing up all the silverware.
Right.
I asked him at that time if he would consider being a Lion member.
You saw a good volunteer there, didn't you?
So he said, well, yeah, I'll consider it. So he was going to college at that time,
Okay.
UConn.
Yeah.
He was only 22. Well, he was not too active as a Lion member because of his time at college.
Right.
But once he graduated, he became very active with us and coordinated many of our suppers and breakfasts. And he is a most outstanding individual, in my opinion.
He seems to be at play in almost every activity.
I've never seen anyone like him, as really as qualified as he is.
It's quite a testament.
He's really unusual. Something I participated in yesterday, besides the blood drive too, was raising money for the mentally handicapped.
Okay.
Knights of Columbus have been doing this for many years.
Right.
And our Simsbury Council raises over $8,000 every year for that purpose. And this money goes to group homes in the Simsbury and Granby area.
Wonderful.
Now, of that $8,000, we have to turn all the money over to the state initially, and they take 20% out and hold it. And then they ask us how we want the checks made out. So they make out the checks and we deliver them to the group homes.
Uh-huh.
Now, the other 20% is available from all the different Knights of Columbus councils in the state.
So they pool it.
And they pool it.
Yep.
And if we have an individual or possibly a group home who has a special project in mind they'd like to do, they tell us what it is, and then we submit that to the state, and generally we get more money back than that 20% to accomplish this.
So they supplement it, and they, I guess as long as the budget permits, they supplement it, and they, what a great program. I mean, that's a real good way to seed some really positive improvements to some very needy organizations. That's great.
Did I mention how much my firce paycheck was, I guess, initially?
$24, I believe it was. Yeah,
and change.
But you got a $200 bonus.
I didn't take any notes here.
Yeah, no.
But anyway.
You're testing me there. Anyway, if we had, this is another question I've asked of most of the guests, is if you had one wish for the town of East Granby, what would that be? If you could, if Charlie had a wand and he could say, okay, I'd like to do this for the town of East Granby, what would that be?
I have no idea. You should have told me about this before.
I know. These are questions that
at least.
Well, it doesn't.
I would have a chance to digest it and think about it.
It's designed to be informal here, and I hit you over the head with these big questions, I guess. If there was anything, is there anything that you would like to see change? Is there anything that you would like to? Just to give you an idea, a lot of people have talked about more commercial development in the center of town so people can stay in town and shop. That's a pretty generic one. But I'm just thinking, you've been around town for quite a few years.
Well, I tell you one thing I wouldn't want to happen is I don't want to see them put a gas station on the corner of 187 and 20, which has been considered at different times.
Right.
And I like to keep whatever we have there.
Right.
Just the way it is.
You've grown fond of the way it's set up. The idea now is with a village center is to try to cultivate more of a village sense. Not necessarily. There's quite. I was on planning and zoning when we were when we passed the village center plan, and one of the contentions and the biggest issues was whether or not you would have that sort of development. And pretty much unanimously, I think people are opposed to that.
Well,
so that's a good thing.
We've had Fitzsimmons grocery store in where Peak Fitness was. Right. And then Bob Kane came over to do his thing, but the town of East Granby residents did not accept that. Okay. And he lost money on that, considerable amount of money. Right. So as long as we have Geisler's and now Stop and Shop, there's no reason, I don't think.
So you're happy with the town?
And of course with Geisler's giving delivery to citizens, that's very helpful too.
Yeah. That's a smart business move.
And one thing I like to see is for us, the Lions Club, of course, have dinner meetings. Right. And we've been going up to Suffield Inn for a number of years, and they just changed hands And now it's going to be questionable whether we will continue.
They've closed.
Yeah, they've closed, but I think they're open certain days.
Oh, are they really?
But are going to consider it. But I'd like to see have a restaurant in town of East Granby provide a room for the Lions to have their meetings and stay right in East Granby.
Okay. There's your wish for East Granby,
Yeah,
right?
that would be the primary wish for East Granby.
Okay. Yeah.
That some restaurant, when I saw the fact a hotel was coming up on Route 20, I thought, oh, we're going to have a hotel that might have a banquet room for sure.
Right.
It looks like it's not going to happen.
So, as a matter of fact, I think I ran into the Lions dinner once up in Agawam.
Yeah.
I was up there one night, and I saw a whole group of people that I recognized, and they were in a... So, yeah, it would be nice to have... I think every town should have a really good restaurant/banquet facility. That's really good. But that's a valid... Well, Charlie, it's been a pleasure. I mean, it's been an honor to have you here tonight, and I continue to be impressed by the people I interview, and it's humbling to have them recount some of their contributions to society, but I applaud you on that, and
thank you.
I wish you continued health, and may you continue to look volunteers to take your place as you move on up the ladder here. It sounds like you've done a great job. I appreciate your time here tonight.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us tonight. As with all our programming on GCTV, you can view it. The regular time for Reflections on East Granby is 8 p.m. on Friday evenings. It's also repeated on Saturday morning, and it's aired various times through the week, which you can find on our website, our online listing of shows that are being broadcast. You can also go to our website, which is, you can find this on the website. The website is www.gctv16.org, and you can find a listing of all the shows that are available through View Online and view them at your convenience. Thank you for joining us tonight, and have a good evening.